Vladimir Putin's most prominent critic is dead. Alexei Navalny, even in an Arctic prison, refused to give up. So what will his death mean for his anti-corruption movement and the future of Russia? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Taking on Vladimir Putin frequently results in imprisonment, death, and sometimes both. Alexei Navalny returned to Russia in 2021 after surviving an attempted poisoning, knowing this would be his fate. And it was.
Demonstrations in Berlin and Paris for the opposition leader and to condemn Putin. In Russia, those supporting or even remembering Navalny were arrested.
I feel very sorry for him and for our country. The country is perishing.
Alexei Navalny was a thorn in Putin's side. Trained as a lawyer, he went on an anti-corruption crusade implicating the top echelon of Russian society. A video of the president's multi-billion-dollar Black Sea resort has almost 130 million views. Navalny narrowly survived a Novichok poisoning in 2020. After recovering, he returned to Moscow in January 2021 and was immediately detained. Mass demonstrations followed but were quashed by the regime. Navalny was found guilty first of violating a suspended sentence, then embezzlement, and then most recently on extremism charges. Writing about imprisonment, he said, "Prison exists in one's mind, and if you think carefully, I'm not in prison, but on a space voyage to a wonderful new world." He left this world on February 16th.
The fact of the matter is, Putin is responsible, and it just cannot be tolerated. I said there would be a price to pay.
The European Union may impose further sanctions on Russia in response. Navalny's widow Yulia has been meeting ministers and has vowed to continue what her late husband now can't.
I should not be here. I should not be recording this video. Another person should have been here, where I am now. But Vladimir Putin killed this man. I will continue the work of Alexei Navalny, continue to fight for our country. I urge you to stand next to me.
But who will stand, and for how long, in the face of an increasingly authoritarian Russia?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from Kyiv is Peter Zalmayev. He is director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. That's an NGO dedicated to political freedoms in post-communist countries. Hanna Liubakova is a Belarusian journalist and a non-resident fellow of the Atlantic Council. We're not revealing her location for her own safety. Philip Ingram is a former senior British military intelligence officer and a commentator on international security issues. And here with me in the studio, I'm delighted to say, is Natalie Sabanadze. She is Senior Research Fellow at the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House, which is a British think tank. I'll come to you first, Peter. One thing just kind of fascinates me in all of this. Why was Vladimir Putin so very scared of Alexei Navalny?
I mean, there are some obvious answers to that probably would range from the fact that he waged this relentless anti-corruption, anti-regime campaign for 2 decades, culminating in meticulously researched and very well, sleekly produced YouTube videos about the wealth of Putin and his cronies. The one particular one I'm thinking of, the palace, about a new palace for Putin that cost billions of dollars in the Caucasus. That was viewed by 130 million people, and so obviously he was very much an unpleasant character for Vladimir Putin. He ran against him in the election, but there's also esoteric reasons you could probably cite as well. I mean, Navalny was a meter and 90 centimeters to Vladimir Putin's 170, and Boris Nemtsov, before he was killed, he told the story how he warned his Putin's predecessor Boris Yeltsin not to pass on power to anyone who is short because of the Napoleonic complex. Be very careful, he said. In Russian history, it's always been the short man that's been vicious and cruel. I mean, don't take what I'm telling you probably too seriously. But be it as it may, Navalny presented a stark contrast to Putin in so many ways. He was charismatic, and he was probably, he was not a flawless character, but at the same time, he was the one that was able to master so much attention that he left every other opposition leader far behind.
Hanna, that's a very good point that Peter makes about that one video in particular, which did a lot to shine a light on what many people would view as the kleptocracy at the heart of Russia, where the money flows up to this tiny percentage who have absolutely everything. And Navalny did a lot to educate people in Russia.
Absolutely. So I guess what Peter was saying is the video, the last one that Navalny published before he returned to Russia. And you might remember that actually I checked right before the program that it now has almost 130 million views. So imagine this is a lot of people watched it, and you just feel how popular both Navalny and his investigations were. He was a great presenter. He was able to explain corruption to Russians in a very easy and simple way, and Russians listened to him. And of course, the issue of corruption is very relevant for Russians because that's a country where many people are poor. But I also think that there is another reason why Navalny was very dangerous, because he was a leader. And he became a symbol. He became a symbol of courage because he was jailed. And every political prisoner has this sort of, symbolic, it becomes this sort of symbolic figure. And this is something that we also have in Belarus, where we have many political prisoners, and many of them are political leaders. And this is why Lukashenko is also scared of them. So this is something that both dictators are really scared of, this sort of courage that political prisoners show.
Philip, do you think this ending was absolutely inevitable?
I think it was. Vladimir Putin has tried on so many occasions, and the thing that scared him most or forced him to do this was his ego. He's tried everything to silence Navalny, and even putting him in prison, poisoning with Novichok, has failed to do so. And whenever it comes to the populist support across Russia, if there was a proper free vote, Navalny would come out on top and Putin would get a very low percentage. And that's what irked Putin. But the other thing that I think is clear with this is that it's sending a message out to other opposition members, individuals who might think that they would want to oppose Putin, in that he will remove them without any problems whatsoever. If we go back to the previous presidential election, exactly 10 days before that is whenever Vladimir Putin carried out his Novichok attack on Sergei Skripal on the streets of Salisbury in the United Kingdom. That was as much about sending a message to people who were potential dissenters to Putin just before the election as it was with Putin trying to get rid of a former spy. And this is where Putin is very dangerous. You oppose him, you die.
Natalie, just on that very point, one piece of this entire tragic episode that I can't get my head around is, why did Navalny go back to Russia?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very difficult question. And I have asked that question to myself many times as well. Well, that was his message. He was, it seems, like really dedicated to show to the people that courage matters and the fight matters, that you can make the difference. And because he was preaching that from far away, he felt like it was his responsibility to go and do it there and really show example. He knew, obviously, that he would go to prison, but his influence, I think the fact that he's dead now, he still had an influence and impact from prison. And I think, just to add what the guests were saying, he was a real political animal. He was more of a threat to Putin than someone else, because even under the conditions of Putin's Russia, he managed to create a network that went beyond Moscow and St. Petersburg. He managed to galvanize popular protest, the largest that Putin has ever seen, right, about 10 years ago. And these videos that had so many viewings. I think there is one more element. I mean, the question we have to ask, obviously, is how did he get access? how did he film this incredibly well done videos? So there is a certain suspicion that maybe he had some connections, particularly in the earlier days. So this must have made Putin even more nervous. It's not just Navalny as an opposition leader, but Navalny as a possible gateway, as a possible instrument in somebody else's hands as well. And there is one more, I mean, one of the guests mentioned that he was a flawed character. And in some ways, that was also his strength, because he was populist, he was nationalist, and that was popular. And he managed to kind of present alternative to Putin, for which many people, not just a small liberal group, but many would follow. So this was a powerful personality. Very courageous.
I've read some of the newspapers who are saying that he fancied himself or saw himself as an almost Nelson Mandela character, that if he went to prison and then came out, that he could revolutionize things.
I think his imprisonment certainly contributed to this symbolic power that he had, and his death contributes even more to that. So, I mean, when we think why Putin did it, there was no really good reason, because now he is becoming almost mythological figure, and you don't know how this is going to play out in the Russian politics. Maybe there will be no unrest, nothing, because there's been very little coverage of it also in the Russian media. But you cannot predict the power of mythological personalities, what impact they will play as a galvanizing force, perhaps at some point down the line. He could be this kind of uniting sort of symbol that can help Russian opposition. But the main reason, I suppose, for his killing is that Putin completely destroys Russian opposition, or the semblance of it. At least nothing is left in Russia itself. They're all outside. But there is one more thing. I think he's also destroying Russian society. And that's why it's a sign of Russia, particularly in these last 2 years, moving from sort of liberal authoritarianism to a truly neo-Stalinist state. I mean, the special operation, he's also conducting a special operation inside Russia. And perhaps we can expect further crackdown on any kind of dissent. I mean, people who go lay flowers are being arrested. Now I see the news that for whatever fake the news, everybody goes to jail if you mention something about Russian army or that special operation. Snitching is back. So some of the methods that have been forgotten are definitely back, and the extent of the state propaganda is really, well, I had a misfortune, I suppose, to live in the Soviet Union or be born. Towards the end, there was none of it, but I remember the importance of state propaganda and how there was no other opinion heard. While before these 2 years, I mean, before the invasion, there was like you could hear at least one radio channel was there, one newspaper was there, people could travel, people could make money. There was some kind of a social contract, unwritten, that if you don't cross me too much, you can have your sort of comfortable life. And that contract is completely over now, for sure.
Thank you, Natalie. Peter, I just want to play in at this point a recent interview I did with Russia's ambassador to the UK. He's called Andrei Kelin. And I asked him specifically about Navalny. This was a few weeks before his death. This interview was recorded just before Christmas. For our viewers, just take a listen to what happened when I brought up the issue and the name Navalny. A lot of people in the West are concerned about Alexei Navalny, who seems to have disappeared. What's your update on? Can you tell us where he is or anything about his condition?
I have no idea, frankly speaking, because we do not follow Alexei Navalny. Probably he has a certain profile in the West, but in Russia he has very low profile. And not many people are eager to understand where he is, what is with him. He's serving his term, and for the deeds that he has done, criminal deeds, and he got a sentence, he's serving his sentence for that.
People in the West would say he was just an opposition figure that President Putin didn't like and had to take him out.
He has no popularity in Russia. He is popular in the West, I would say. He used to be popular in the West, but in Russia he has no political weight.
So you see him as a criminal?
He has committed crimes, of course, definitely.
Peter, so that's very much what the Russian establishment thought of Navalny, a criminal paying the price of his crimes. I mean, he paid the ultimate price.
Well, indeed, he paid the ultimate price. And once again, in contrast with Stalin's era, repressions that started in earnest in 1937, there was actually a death penalty for these sort of crimes, and at least the Stalinist regime was honest about this. Vladimir Putin still is not there. He is banking on the fact that his system is so sophisticated, his brainwashing system, his federal TV channels are so sophisticated that they will keep a large portion of the population, if not actively engaged in hating the West for its pedophile ways or hating Ukraine, at least it will be politically inactive because of these several short trials, meaning that Putin has not had to rely on this sort of repressive machinery to the same extent that Stalin did, But nonetheless, we see that whether it was a direct hit on Navalny or not, the regime essentially sentenced him to death. And I also, let me just mention this article, Nina Khrushcheva, the great-granddaughter of Nikita Khrushchev, just mentioned, very funny, living in Russia in the last 2 decades of Navalny's activity was like living, I'm quoting her, a little bit like in the Harry Potter universe, where the feared Lord Voldemort is called he who must not be named. Putin and the rest of his coterie, they never mentioned this guy by name. That just shows you the fear that resides and has resided deep inside Vladimir Putin's heart about the character of Alexei Navalny.
Well, Alexander Litvinenko, he lost his life at the hands of Russian poisoners. His widow is Marina Litvinenko, and this is the advice she has given to Yulia Navalny.
When my husband died, I hardly can talk for a whole week, even more. I just couldn't believe if anybody wanted to hear my voice, or what could I tell people after the death of my husband. But Yulia did very right things, because her husband, Alexei, was so well known in Russia, abroad, and she needs to keep his voice alive. And she is now his voice. And I want people around her to support her, to help her family, because as long as she would be able to talk, she will drive this attention, and everybody will remember Alexei, what we all need.
Natalie, very interesting to hear from Marina Litvinenko. What advice would you give Yulia Navalny now?
It's very hard to advise her, but I think she has demonstrated also incredible courage, dedication. I think she's probably taking inspiration from Madame Tikharetskaya, that Hanna probably knows well. I think she's paying tribute to her husband, first of all, by doing this. But the video she released struck me by how well done it was, and how her tone, her message, the combination of emotion and content, how well calibrated it was. Yeah. So it shows that she really has a potential, but she has a potential as an opposition leader outside of Russia. And I think she should definitely stay outside of Russia for her safety, although as Marina Litvinenko knows, there is no guarantee. I was looking at some of the Russian reactions to, from the propagandists to her appearance, and they were saying, oh, poor Yulia, she's in the hands of CIA and MI6. So they are presenting her as somebody who's an instrument of the Western manipulation. So she needs to be aware also how her appearance will be spinned by pro-Kremlin propagandists. But I think to begin with, she should focus on elections that are coming, or so-called elections that are coming up now in Russia, because, I mean, this happened clearly in the context of elections. And this calls into question the legitimacy of these elections. I mean, we know that it's a farce, but autocracies actually need elections just as much as democracies for other reasons, but they do. And Putin cares for recognition and legitimacy. And this is a big blow to the legitimacy of these elections, in addition to the fact that Natalie was not allowed, and there was another candidate who was also not allowed. So I think she can help sort of steer international opinion in that direction, and that could be a good beginning for now.
Peter, do you think she can punch through successfully and keep landing messages against Putin?
Well, I think, yes, we've had successful examples. The widow of Mr. Aquino, Corazon Aquino, who won the presidency of Philippines from the dictator Marcos, even though that was 1986, the situation was quite a bit different there. We have Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who took over her imprisoned husband in Belarus, and the record there is mixed. She's sidelined, she's outside in exile, and I suspect that that is the fate for the next at least few years, maybe decades for Yulia Navalny. But I think the more important thing is what she will be campaigning for, agitating for. She has to get that very straight. Does she want people to turn up in the protests of some sort of protest actions? That's a sheer impossibility in Russia. And what her overarching goal and vision of Russia is.
Hanna, do you think if Yulia Navalny gets her messaging right, that she can connect with the women of Russia? Is that possible?
It probably is. It just depends, of course, on the message, on the form, and whether she, right messaging and everything. I think that the movement, anti-corruption movement that Alexei Navalny established and his team, has been quite successful in reaching people inside the country. For now, the message is obviously corruption and changes in Russia, but of course they can expand and they can talk about other issues. I'll just quickly come back to the comparison with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the leader of the Democratic Forces of Belarusian former presidential candidate. I think there is a huge difference between Yulia Navalny, others, and Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, because she actually participated in the election. She was probably elected, and this is why Lukashenko is so scared of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. So she became a politician. She's not only in exile, she was in Belarus, and she was part of the election, and she probably won them. So this is, I think, a huge difference, and it gives her a lot of legitimacy in that sense. And it's a question whether Yulia Navalny will have it.
Philip, there are oceans of Russian cash frozen and seized overseas. Do you think this could be part of the international repercussions for what Putin has done here?
I do think so, and I think it's time for the international community to start taking some of the frozen Russian assets and giving them to Ukraine to help Ukraine start to rebuild some of the damage that's been done, but also to help fund what it needs to try and push Russia back, because we're seeing the political difficulties there are in not just European nations, but also in the United States, as people use access to funding and military material for internal political reasons rather than anything else. And I don't think we can underestimate the cost that there will be to the rest of the world if Vladimir Putin is allowed to fix his lines on what he has captured so far. The implications for the West are massive indeed, and we won't have seen even a small percentage of what it's going to cost us overall if we don't give Ukraine the wherewithal to push Putin back to the internationally recognized boundaries.
Natalie, final question to you. How do you imagine Putin is feeling now? Yet another thorn in his side taken out.
Well, judging by the footage, when he heard about the news, he was meeting workers somewhere in the factory. I think he's very pleased. He is clearly preparing very hard, and I wonder why is he so worried? These elections are a sham anyway, but he's preparing for them. He wants it to go the way he planned it, basically. No real opposition, exactly. It's a question, it's an exercise in management and bureaucracy, as it was said, rather than in a popular vote. But I think it's very important, and I would second what Philip said, there should be some sort of reaction. I'm not saying that Navalny's killing somehow should overshadow what he has been doing in Ukraine. And I think what he has been doing in Ukraine is definitely more than enough as a reason to have a very coordinated, quick, and decisive response, which is now sort of fading. But the courage or the sacrifice of one person is also always somehow very impressive on an emotional level. And there is the story of Yulia and him being stuck there in the Arctic Circle and then executed in so cold-heartedly. I think it certainly helped to sort of bring again attention to what kind of state we're dealing with. And as I said, it's increasingly neo-Stalinist at home and neo-imperial abroad. And if it is not stopped, we're going to have a much bigger problem closer to the borders of Europe.
It's a talking point for another day. Natalie, Hanna, Peter and Philip, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. And if you like what you see, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.